This is the Comics Alternative, episode 225. Reviews of Love is Love and Resist. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And this week we have rather a political show. We're going to look at two comics anthologies with politics front and center. We're going to begin with the new collection from IDW, Love is Love. And then after that, we're going to look at the freebie that came out last weekend, which is Resist. But before we get to that discussion, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse comics at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off cover price, sometimes 50% off cover, but many times you can find discounts that go higher than that.
That's right, and as this episode is coming out at the 1st of February, you can check out DCB Services offers for their February orders. So check those out at dcbservice.com.
That's right. You can find great discounts every single month at Discount Comic Book Service. Their website is dcbservice.com. You got to go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. That's
right.
Well, Andy, this is a little different than what we usually do for our first show of the month. For the past few years, we've been using the first Wednesday, which is when our show goes up, the first Wednesday of the month as our preview shows. We're not doing it this time around for a couple of reasons. One, this show's going to go up on February 1st, and it's, you and I, sometimes we scramble around to get a copy of previews in time for the recording, and we don't have a copy yet. But we will do our preview show next week. But I think a much more important reason is that there were a couple of titles, one in particular that is very timely, and we wanted to discuss them while the proverbial iron was hot.
Yeah, that's right. We've got we've got a lot going on in the United States right now, and there's there are actually a lot of comics being produced today that are responding to the political situation that we have right now, or recent events. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at these two works, the Love is Love anthology, which was creators responding to the shooting at the Pulse Nightclub in Orlando, I think back in October, was it?
No, it was June 12th of last year.
Oh, June 12th. Okay, yeah. Okay. And then
there are just so many shootings. I mean, it is a sad state. You get them mixed up.
Yeah. And then the Resist, I guess, newspaper that was handed out at the Women's March last weekend. And there's a lot of other things that, going on. I think we're now in a place with some really maybe it's unfortunate, but some really great political cartooning is going on right now. At our end of the year show, I mentioned the Nib is one of my favorite places to go, one of my favorite comics of the year, and I go there now every day to see what they've posted, and whether it's a nice succinct dig at whatever happened the day before, or some good comics journalism that gives us some information that we all need to kind of make informed decisions about politics today. The nib has turned out to be a vital resource for me.
Right, and with ongoing established comics, strips, creators of that sort, they also have a lot of stuff, a lot of fodder for them to cartoon about. Obviously there's Tom Tomorrow and Burke Breathed and what they're doing, and then cartoonists that I like to follow, like Eli Valley is having. I don't know what to say, fortunately or unfortunately, a really rich time in terms of his material.
Yeah. So, we're seeing an incredible amount of good work, and hopefully, in its accumulation, it'll have an impact. I know the nib, Matt Bors at the nib did a thing on, I think it was on Inauguration Day, where he asked cartoonists to draw a cartoon. I don't know if you saw this on social media, to draw a cartoon with the only text or caption is, "You lost by 2.8 million votes. Sad."
I did not see that.
Okay, and so he started the ball rolling with a picture, with a drawing of the president under, I think, 3 or 4 streams of urine, which was matting his hair down with that line on it. And they varied from being, that kind of, and the deal was to tweet them at the president. Mm-hmm. And so, there were quite a few of those that accumulated over the course of that day. That was nice. But I think there's also cartoonists getting involved in other ways. Today we're recording this on a Sunday. It's the day after we saw an enormous kind of grassroots groundswell of protests over
at airports, at
airports, and over the recent executive order regarding immigration that's turned out to have disastrous consequences for many American citizens and others who need to be in the United States. And so last night I was kind of glued to the news and social media and just kind of wondering what to do. And then the news came out about the ACLU's lawyers had successfully gotten a New York judge to issue a stay, I guess is what it's called, to stop the prevention of people, especially U.S. citizens, from being allowed into the allow them into the U.S. without these extraordinary problems that were being created, and so that got me excited. I was glad the ACLU was successful in doing it, and so I'd planned on making a donation to the ACLU anyway, and then started to see a variety of comics creators, some of whom we've had on the show, many of whom we've talked about on the show, start offering to do sketches for people who made $50 donations to the ACLU, among other organizations as well. Mm-hmm. And I was first cued to this by our colleague, our fellow Comics Alternative co-host, Sean Kleefeld. And some of those, and this was started by Sarah Glidden. So basically, last night we had
recently on the show,
right. So so Saturday night, most of these people aren't doing this by the time this show airs. But on Saturday night, if you had donated to the ACLU and sent her a picture of the receipt for $50 or more, she would send a sketch of herself reading the news. And then others started to follow suit. Others that we've, some of whom we've had on the show. Leanna Fink, Box Brown would do a drawing of a wrestler of choice, which, getting a Box Brown wrestler sketch is a pretty good deal. And then others that we've talked about on the show: Julia Wirtz, Liz Prince, And then more recently, today, Josh Baer, who's actually doing it through the 15th. So people listening today, if you donate to the ACLU and send and follow Josh Baer on Facebook and get his email address, you can send him a picture of your receipt, and he'll do whatever you want. He's taking he's taking any commissions, whereas several others were doing things like they would draw a robot or a monster or a dinosaur or something like that. So quite a few. I mean, there's way more than the ones I just mentioned, but it's a great thing that they all did.
Right. And, one of the things that a lot of creators started to do from the moment that Trump was elected was to offer discounts or donations or just something regarding their art in some way. If you donated to like the ACLU or some other charitable organization, Planned Parenthood, or they would make donations take a certain percentage of a purchase you made of theirs online, which I think is a great thing. We've seen more and more of that, and it's needed. We can expect, and I hope we'll see much more of that in the days to come.
Yeah, and I really do hope that this, this all has an impact,
right,
on things. And I think one of the things that inspired me yesterday was that you could see the direct impact of the ACLU in particular on, making things better. Mm-hmm. And so, I want to support that as much as possible.
Right. Well, let's get into a discussion of the actual books that we're going to be discussing for this week that have everything to do with recent political, cultural issues in the United States. And we're going to begin with one that commemorates an event that occurred on June 12th, 2016 in Orlando, Florida, and that is the deadly Pulse nightclub murders. And this is Love is Love. It came out in late December of last year. It arrived in, I guess, regular bookstores this month. It is edited by Sarah Gaden, who works at IDW, and Jamie S. Rich, who works at DC. But this is an IDW publication with a lot of DC involved in the project. Now, this originally started out as an idea of Marc Andreyko's, and he even does the afterword in the back that's really nice. So he's a New York Times best-selling author, but he's worked in comics. He does like Manhunter, Wonder Woman 77, Batwoman, Doctor Strange. Mm-hmm. So this is everything that he's pulled together, and here we have a collection of pieces that most of which are maybe 1 page long, none longer than 2 pages, by a whole variety, a slew of creators, some whose names everyone would recognize, some lesser known, some maybe not really known at all, or at least I didn't know who these guys were. But I think it all comes together in a great mix.
Yeah. And some of these are narrative comics, others are illustrations, and even some cases like illustrated poems.
Right.
So there is an interesting and wide variety of material here. So much so I'm not even kind of sure how you review or talk about something like this, because of the kind of, there's the collective experience of going through a book like this. And, I have to say I got really emotional while I was reading this book, because, it's one page after another of really, really moving stories, or really kind of well-written observations about, the state of the world and what we need to do to make the world better and be better people.
Right. We should also mention that all the proceeds from this book are going to the victims, survivors, and the families of the Orlando shooting through Equality Florida. Right. So, it's it's a great collection, but it's also a great cause. Go out and get this, definitely. And in fact, I was listening to another podcast, a comics-related podcast, and it's one that every month crunches the numbers and or reports the numbers from Diamond, but also does some own crunching on its own. It's John Mayo's comic book page. Yeah. And he had mentioned in, I think it was this month's Mayo report with the trades, that Love and Love was the #1 comic for December. And so that was notable, but another thing I found curious is that he and his co-host for that show, they didn't know at first what Love is Love was, and they had to look it up, which I found a little curious. Usually when it's non-DC Marvel mainstream, and especially non-mainstream in general, it may be out of their wheelhouse, and they may not recognize the title. But there's a lot of DC involved here, so I would have thought that this was something that would register more. I just found it curious that a few avid comics fans didn't know about this, but apparently a lot of people did because it was a #1 seller, and that's great. Now, I want to comment on something that you said a moment ago, and I'm glad that you brought this up, that, one, you didn't know where to start with something like this, and I agree completely. But you also shared your experience in reading it kind of all at one time. I did the same thing. I feel mixed about having done that. On the one hand, I felt that it was too much for me at one sitting, even though that's what I did, and too much in a variety of different ways. Too much sadness, too much anger, too much emotional exhaustion when I was finished. And so part of me wonders if maybe I should have broken up my reading experience. But then another side of me believes that maybe this kind of taxing reading experience is what this book demands of us. That we do take it on maybe all at one time if we're able, or over a relatively short period of time, take in all the pieces with all of the emotions, all of the issues and ideas that come out in this collection, and there's a lot, and that's why it was so exhausting for me.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think one of the cumulative effects, though, is one that I think is an important outcome of this book, and I think a goal of this book in general, which is seeing all of these supportive stories, all these narratives that are both about personal stories of creators coming out, personal stories of creators who maybe straight, but how their lives have changed, how their minds have been opened, or how they wrestled with what was going on in the Pulse, when the news of the Pulse nightclub shooting took place, and those personal stories from a broad range of experiences and responses, I think when taken accumulatively really does feel positive in the end. That one isn't alone in feeling the way one feels,
right,
about these things, and even though it can sometimes be overwhelming to see, the amount of hate that there is in the world because of and that's aimed at the LGBTQ community, and in the case of this incident, that a work like this can really kind of overpower that. That feeling, that overwhelming feeling that maybe there's too much hate in the world.
Right. And there are a variety of different kinds of pieces in this collection. You mentioned that a lot of them are personal stories from the creators themselves. And those personal stories can take many hues. I mean, some are stories, as you mentioned, of these creators actually coming out, or some of the complications that they have experienced having come out, or because of any kind of gender-related issue. Other personal stories about where they were or what was happening when they learned of the Orlando shootings. But there are also a lot of contributions in this collection that aren't personal experiences, recollections, but are more maybe reflective pieces. There are others that have a softer edge to them. There are some that are more overtly political and have, I think, a harsher, in a pointed, good way, message that the creators are wanting to express. And so there's just a wide mix. And I couldn't help but thinking as I was reading this, if this had been any other kind of anthology, I would have been I don't want to say a much more critical reader, but a less patient reader, as I usually tend to be when it comes to anthologies, in that I would tend to gravitate toward and feel resonance with those kind of pieces that are of my particular kind of taste, okay? Mm-hmm. And then if something was a little bit too sentimental or maudlin or had too trite of an ending, I would feel a little dismissive. I didn't feel that here, though, because while reading this, I kept thinking, the point of this book is to demonstrate the diversity of not only everyone in Orlando, Florida, but all over, right? Mm-hmm. In all of its hues, and the acceptance and the understanding and the empathy of that. And so if there was a piece here that I didn't particularly like in terms of personal taste, well, that's okay. I could admire and appreciate the way it was done and then move on to the next piece or the next story or the next illustration. And there's something in there for everyone. But it's a different it's a collection made up of entirely different pieces in many ways, but that's a good thing.
Right. Yeah, there was one, it's hard for me to distinguish from one piece to another, but there was one piece later on, now I can't remember who did it, that I thought was particularly interesting and effective in making kind of an overall statement that made for me a kind of overall statement on the book, and it was one of I know it was later in the book.
And we don't have page numbers here, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's the it's the one where the creator, the writer, is actually wrestling with what he's going to do for the piece.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I remember that. I'm trying to find it now. I thought that was a particularly poignant one, mm-hmm. one that neither of us can recall right now.
Well, there's a lot of different ones. The thing that struck me about that one, though, is that it kind of makes some commentary on how this book came together, and Andreyko does have a page at the end where he talks about how he came about doing this. But the the piece I'm thinking of anyway talks about how one of the requests that Andreyko made is that it doesn't become too political. Or too negative or critical.
I remember that. Oh, yeah. In fact, that's in the first half, I believe.
Oh, is it? I can't. I thought it was towards the end. That's where my brain goes, I guess, with these. But anyway, that and so that it's interesting that there was that kind of suggestion, and I think for the most part, most the creators do kind of follow that they do follow a positive message. But it's also interesting to see those who wrestle with it, that wrestle with the idea that they know that they should be positive here, but there is, there is a real impulse to be critical of the way people behave and the way people, the way people hate, and the kinds of policies and policy makers who perpetuate this sort of hate.
Exactly. And, I think I was talking earlier about the kind of pieces that resonated more with me. I think I really enjoyed most the ones where the creators actually did come out and assert themselves in a way that may strike some readers as, I don't know, perhaps inappropriate given the topic. Or, in other words, they took a stand, right? They drew a line. Yeah. And of course, this is, this book is about not creating fences. But there's a difference between creating a fence and drawing a line. And I think that many of these creators in their pieces do draw a particular line and say, we will not go any further than this, or we do not tolerate certain attitudes. But not all of them are like that. I mean, there's some that do take, I guess, the advice to be a little on the safe side. And again, that's fine. But and then there are those that are in the middle. And I'm thinking one in particular. This is one of my favorites in this anthology, and not just because I'm a big fan of Grant Morrison, but I think because it says a lot without any text whatsoever. This is the 2-page spread fairly early on. This is in the first quarter of the book. And in the foreground, we have these long vertical images, these panels of legs of people dancing. And each panel is a particular color, the color of the rainbow. And then on top of that is the image of a pulse beat, or it could be the beat of the music. And then behind all of this, in the background, is a dance of death or dance macabre image. And it's just the juxtaposition of all of that, the background of the dance macabre, the panels multicolored of the dancing feet, and then the heartbeat on top of everything just says a lot with no words whatsoever. And I thought that was expertly done.
Yeah. So there's several of those in here that are just kind of meant to be taken in for their visceral impact. And I think that's a good example of one of them. And some that are just an image. Almost functioning as a kind of political cartoon.
Another one of my favorites occurs about halfway through, and this is it's a one-pager, and it's an image of just a hotel door. And on the outside of the hotel door, there's the Do Not Disturb tag.
Right.
And then you hear the sound that is apparently emanating from behind the door. Ah, ooh, oh, yes, oh, and laughing and sighs of ecstasy. And so you don't know what's going on there, and that's the point. And this is by Fernando Bianco, and he writes, "This is a comic. In this panel, we can hear a couple screaming in pleasure from inside the room, or because this is a comic, we only read all these sex noises and onomatopoeia. Probably you think they are a heteronormative couple. But wait, maybe it isn't a couple. Maybe it's only one person. Or maybe it's a group of people. These sounds also have no gender, because we only read the sound of voices that we can't hear. So they could be male or female or transsexual or queer. They could be homosexuals or heterosexuals, bisexuals or pansexuals, or maybe everything at the same time. A gigantic multisexual orgy. Or maybe they're only asexuals pretending, joking about having sex. This is a comic, a fiction, but reality is not different. Just sounds coming from the privacy of someone's room. Nobody cares about what happens inside, not even if your moral values or your religious dogma are against whatever is happening inside. But are you sure about what's happening inside? Or is only a fiction inside your, or is it only a fiction inside your sinful imagination? Assume this: they are adults doing whatever they want under consent. As simple as that. So please, do not disturb." I thought that was clever.
That's clever, and I think that's also a good example of one that that demonstrates some of the ways in which these creators use text and image together. I mean, as you read that, that's a pretty text-heavy single panel cartoon, but one that's very effective, that is also commenting on, you know, the way we read comics and the assumptions that we bring, you know, the kind of, you know, that's a really good example of thinking about, say, like Scott McCloud's idea of closure. You know, how do you literally through this closed door, how do you imagine the story that's going on inside there?
Yes, exactly.
By the way, I did find the one story I was talking about earlier. So.
Oh, good, because that was bugging me. And which one is that?
It is also about halfway through, and it is Matthew Rosenberg and Ammon K. Nahulpan is the artist. Yeah, and so basically it's about, you know, it's about Rosenberg kind of wrestling with what to write about, and, you know, and kind of finally coming to the conclusion. And I think that's a good way to talk about what to do with this sort of project.
Oh yeah, okay. I see the one that you're discussing here, right? 4 days ago, Mark emailed me at 1 a.m. and asked me. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the personal sides that are his little editorial insertions. I particularly appreciate.
Yeah, that many of the panels, the caption box will have an asterisk in it, and then the asterisk will lead you down to another caption box that has these asides in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to write about our country. I gotta say this, okay? I'd love to write about our country's fucked up love affair with guns and violence, but this isn't supposed to be political. And there's an asterisk, and at the bottom of the panel, he says, "But seriously, fuck the NRA."
Yeah.
And then there are a couple of other examples of that.
Mm-hmm. He also points out one other thing in here, showing a picture of him. M&K draws a picture of him as a child, basically, and playing with action figures, and it says, "I thought about doing something with superheroes. They've always helped me make sense of my world, but that felt trivial to me in light of real people losing their lives." And then the asterisk leads to, I'm sure better writers than me will do it brilliantly in here. Well, I mean, I don't know about that self-criticism there, but the one of the other kind of groups of stories that we do get in here is stories with existing superheroes, responding to these events. Several people do Batman. There's Supergirl. There's some Superman images.
Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy.
Yeah, the Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy that Paul Dini and Bill Morrison is one of the more lighthearted ones in the book. Things in the book, and that is really funny. I guess there's Wonder Woman as well, and even an interesting one featuring Deathstroke and what's their names? Apollo and Midnighter. Show up several times. So,
which makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So you have those as well, and I think that Rosenberg's comment that, for him, and I think for a lot of people, especially when they're young, superheroes help make sense of the world. That this idea that Grant Morrison has about Superman, for example, that we can kind of use him as a moral guide for how we should behave. I think that that's something that the creators pick up on here with the various characters. But in many of the cases, it's these superhero characters actually feeling helpless,
right,
about the situation. They see Supergirl, for example, in the one that Sterling Gates wrote. The one with Batman that Tom King and Mitch Gerads did, where Batman's kind of standing in the club with all these dead bodies around him, and the final panel is the police saying, you know, he's in there investigating. If anybody can figure this out, he can, and he has just admit that he can't figure it out.
Right, he's nonplussed. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned this comment in Rosenberg's text here that he felt that anything superhero related from him would be felt as trivial. And, you know, I have to say that I don't know if I'd call them trivial, but the pieces that I enjoyed the least were those that involved the DC superheroes. Not that because I don't like superhero comics, I do. It's just, again, I don't know if I'd call it trivial, but I just couldn't take it as seriously, and I guess that's a problem with me, than the stories that do not fall back on the superheroes. I almost felt like that with the one Archie entry that we had here, but I think, well, maybe we had two Archie contributions. Yes, we had two. I didn't feel the same, but again, I don't know. It's the something about the use of the pre-existing property to do something like that. I don't know. It's hard to articulate how I'm feeling here. Let me just put it this way. With some of the one-pagers that aren't comics but are more illustrations, and you have the superheroes in the act of doing something, I couldn't help but think of propaganda. The word propaganda. And, you know, not all propaganda is bad. It's a propaganda that encourages solidarity, which of course is a good thing. But it's just not for me. And that gets back to what I'd mentioned earlier in terms of personal taste. But I know that there are a lot of people who would appreciate that much more than they would, let's say, the Grant Morrison contribution. Yeah,
well, you know, I think that there's an interesting comparison there, because you do have a lot of really moving personal stories in here too. You know, or people trying to tell stories of you know, people who are even at the nightclub, or who knew someone at the nightclub, or thought they might know somebody at the nightclub. You know, that kind of panic of not knowing whether a friend of yours in Orlando survived or not.
Right.
And you know, and those have a lot of emotional impact to them. But you know, I do, you know, when I look at the superhero ones, or the ones with pre-existing characters, or like licensed characters, because there's a couple of exceptions I want to talk about later as well. I feel like the impact is closer to kind of what Rosenberg's saying in that one piece, that, you know, we can use superheroes in some way to make sense of the world, and that the idea of that an iconic character, and this may be especially true for younger readers, of an iconic character coming out and making a very you know, unequivocal statement about the value of love and respect for other people has a different kind of impact than the more personal stories. And so I think there's an interesting place for all of these. I would be, you know, I would almost like, I mean, I guess I could do this with the PDF, be able to pull some of these out individually, you know, and share them as separate comics, and maybe make, you know, an anthology of the superhero, you know, a separate little collection of the superhero ones versus some of the other stuff.
Right. Now, I will say that the one superhero contribution in this collection that I really enjoyed was the one from Jeremy Burant and Sean Von Gorman and their treatment of Rainbow Boy.
Yeah, we get the return of Rainbow Boy.
Yeah. Who is? I mean, it's funny, and we've talked about Rainbow Boy 2 or 3 times on the podcast within the context of strange superhero, right? I mean, he's usually framed that way, one of these weirder, more outlandish, older superheroes. But here, what Burant and Von Gorman do is to bring him back. It looks a little silly, kind of contemporaneous, makes him contemporary, but the message is what it's all about, and so he's used in a very fun way.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I had briefly mentioned in that previous comment was that there are also some
other properties.
Some creators bringing their own properties to this. Including Jeff Krell's Jason, which gets a 1-panel image, but Jason was a staple in the old gay comics series that Howard Cruz and others originally put together, and Kyle's Bed and Breakfast by Greg Fox, which is a long ongoing kind of serial soap opera comic that appears, I think, in gay newspapers. That is very popular there, but is almost completely unknown outside of that world.
And you also have Tim Seeley's Hack Slash.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is facing the Jason pinup. Yeah. And then, there are other properties that are used as well. Jim Lee uses Harry Potter for his contribution. Basically, you have the main characters of Harry Potter, the kids, and I guess Dumbledore, and underneath, they're holding their wands up, and in the background is a rainbow flag or a banner. And underneath is the quote, differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open. So I'm assuming that he got the okay from Rowling in order to do that. And, thinking about the, I guess, more recognizable licensed property and the superheroes in particular, again, they're not my cup of tea, but I ask myself, now, if you take them out of this collection, then what are we left with? I still think we could have a coherent collection with what's left, and even adding more like that, right? The personal reflections, the slice of life, personal narratives, and no superheroes at all. However, what the presence of the superheroes in particular bring Love is Love is wider recognition and sales. I mentioned at the top of the show that this was the #1 selling trade the previous month. I really don't think that would have been the case if DC did not contribute heavily to this in terms of allowing their properties to be used in an IDW publication. I mean, yes, there would have been this outpouring of support of people buying the book just because they wanted to support the survivors and the families of the tragedy. But would it have sold as much? I have no way of knowing. I suspect maybe not. But I think a lot of the sales probably went to people who were really into the superhero comics, and whether for reasons of just they wanted to be completist with their Midnighter runs, or they or just love superheroes in general, or anything that DC published they wanted to be a part of, they got this, and so I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good thing when a major publisher like DC, owned by Warner Communications, comes out and makes a pretty unequivocal statement about where they stand.
Right.
I mean, even you've got co-publishers Dan Didio and Jim Lee doing separate pieces for this book as well. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you have you not only have the corporate blessing to do something like this, but you actually have executives in the company producing pieces for it. I think sends a really important message out there. And, unfortunately, the world of comic book fans is not as accepting and welcoming a place as it should be. And that's a thing that has never, ever made sense to me. I can't understand this mentality that would be so exclusive, that says, that superhero comics are only for these certain people, or that any kind of comic aimed at some other group or of interest to other readers is not of interest to everybody as well. And then I wonder, have these people ever read the superhero comics that they're reading? Because the message overall in superhero comics from, back in the 1940s has always been one of, inclusiveness and understanding. I mean, it's one that's had to evolve, of course, because the treatment of people of color and the LGBT community hasn't always been perfect in comics. But from very early on, there's always been a very inclusive and liberal message about how we should treat each other. And so I don't understand what people who don't see that message are actually getting out of the comics that they're reading, unless they're just kind of, power fantasies or something like that.
Yeah. And, that is a stereotype of comic book readers, specifically superhero comic book readers, that they're just, whether they're kids or adults, they're adolescent for all practical purposes, males who are really into power fantasies, and that's it. And I think that's unfortunate. But at the same time, you mentioned that there are those readers out there who aren't more attuned to the very issues that their heroes fight for.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to stereotype or paint all comic readers with the same brush, but that, we see on the internet this, very often this really kind of vocal group that is threatened by these things. And again, it's baffling to me.
Yeah. Well, they will definitely benefit by picking up this anthology. Love is Love.
One would hope that someone picks this up who's they're like, oh, I'm a Batman completist, or I'm a Harley Quinn completist. I need to get this book, even though this goes against all of my beliefs. And they read it and they realize, oh, these are human beings. I should feel better. I should treat people better. I mean, I don't know, I mean, not to get too personal on this, but, I look back on my own growing up in a pretty isolated area, and having opinions and having stated opinions that I'm embarrassed by now. So I know something had to happen to me along the way as I was growing up, that I started to understand and empathize with people better. And it's still an ongoing process, I think. But I look back at even things I would say in a class in college that I just cringe at. And that gives me a little more sympathy for my own students when they say things like that. But I hope that there is, I look at my own experience, and I know that there's hope for people to progress if they don't kind of dig in and get entrenched in their own worldview.
Right. Yeah. And, there's just so much in this collection that something for everyone together. In fact, flipping through this just one last time before we move on, there are a couple that really stand out. And one really, really hits me emotionally. Anything dealing with dogs is going to be powerful. But this is one, it's an almost wordless one-page comic, and it begins with a canine in a pound and a particular date, and there's a number to the dog. In other words, the dog is a number in a kennel or a pound, and then in the next panel, you see that a young man has gotten this dog from the pound. And then the next series of panels shows the dog and the man playing together, having a good time, going outside. And then toward the end, we see the man leaving and telling his dog goodbye. Then the next panel is a darkened room where the dog is waiting right there at the door, and mail is starting to pile up. And then there's a close-up on a newspaper, and you know that his owner is one of the victims. And the very last panel is the dog, older now, is back behind the fence at the pound with another date and another number, with his head bowed. Oh, I mean, that's gut-wrenching.
Yeah, it is.
And then another one I wanted to point out, and I think this is significant, most of the contributions, not all, but most of them in this collection are from creators that I would consider part of, loosely speaking, the mainstream, and not just DC and Marvel, but also other publishers like Dark Horse or Image or IDW that are part of the mainstream. It isn't that often that you see something from, let's say, an alternative or a real indie creator, indie to the sense that not many people know who they are. But this collection ends, and very appropriately enough, with Ed Luce's Lovable Oaf.
Yeah.
And I like the Lovable Oaf comics. And for those who don't know, Lovable Oaf is Luce's story about this really big, burly, and hairy man who is gay. And he, as the title suggests, is a lovable oaf. And it's about his experiences with his friends and the people at the club that he attends. And I mean, he really speaks for the LGBTQ community. And it ends with this piece, which I think is most appropriate.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. I like that closing. And that was one of the others I forgot to mention, and that I wanted to mention. With the creator-owned characters that appear in here.
So if you haven't already, definitely go out and get your copy of Love is Love, published by IDW.
Yeah, get a bunch of copies.
Get a bunch of copies. Share them with friends.
And I think actually that's something I would recommend doing if you can get a hold of the next thing that we're talking about, the Resist Comics newspaper that came out last weekend, published by Desert Island. I don't know how many of our listeners were at the Women's March in Washington, or one of the various women's marches. I had quite a few friends there, and they said they saw this all over the place.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And we managed to get a couple copies, and that's one of the things mentioned. If you have a local store that has these, maybe not get greedy with them, but if you know some people who could use one of these, give them to them. I know I'm taking. We got 2 copies, right?
Exactly, and
I'm going to give one of those away.
Yes. You and I both stayed put last weekend, January 21st, during the big march. And the marches, not only in D.C., but all over this country and all over the globe, they were taking place. And so it was a really big event. But, of course, everyone should know about this unless you've been asleep over the past 2 weeks. But neither Andy nor I were going any place where these would be available. And so last weekend, we looked online, and on the Resist website, which is resistsubmission.com, there was a list at one of their pages of the various comic shops around the country that had ordered bunches of these. Yeah. And one of them was, I guess the closest one to me was More Fun Comics in Denton, Texas. And I called them up. They said, we don't have them yet as of Saturday morning, but they were expecting them soon, and they would hold a couple copies for us. And they did. And so I want to thank the people at More Fun Comics and Games in Denton. And by the way, they're located on West Hickory Street, not too far from North Texas University. Or University of North Texas, I'm sorry, and also Texas Women's University. So they were really good to hold those copies for us. I drove up there to get our copies on Monday, and I mailed one to you. But we also got copies from a friend of the show, and this is Jared at Big Planet Comics. I saw that Big Planet had ordered bunches of these as well, and I wasn't sure if we were going to get a copy anywhere, and so we emailed Jared to ask if he had extra copies, if he could send me and Andy one, and he came through. We got ours just the other day, and so not only do we want to thank More Fun Comics and Games in Denton, but also Jared at Big Planet. And by the way, Big Planet has several locations in the D.C. area. So there's D.C., Bethesda, Vienna, Virginia, and then College Park, Maryland. So make sure that you stop by a Big Planet and say, hey, thanks for sending Derek and Andy a copy of Resist.
Yeah.
But we do want to thank you guys for helping out with this, because now we have copies of Resist. And this is a first on the show in that it's the first and only occasion so far that you and I have reviewed a freebie newspaper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. We have, this was put out by Desert Island. We have talked about Desert Island before, but you're right. This is the first for this, but this is a pretty, this is unique in that it is a work that is specifically timed to come out for a specific event and a specific point in our history.
Right. Now, this was originally the idea of Gabe Fowler. He's the editor of Smoke Signal, and you mentioned that we reviewed, it was back in August, we looked at the latest issue, number 25 of Smoke Signal.
Yeah.
So he wanted to make this a special issue of Smoke Signal, or maybe the next issue of Smoke Signal. But then he got in touch with Francois Mouly, and they decided to do something separate. And so the editors of this newspaper, Resist, are Francois Mouly and her daughter with Art Spiegelman, Nadja Spiegelman.
Right. And they solicited contributions, an open solicit or open call, and they got thousands and thousands of responses.
Right.
And so what you have in this one tabloid newspaper is just, a fraction of the ones they got. And they chose works by well-known creators and individual works by others who, may be new to comics or may not be as well known.
Or who may not really do much in comics at all. People who are just amateurs,
right?
Who may be artists of some sort, but just wanted to submit something in solidarity. And so that's one of the things I love about this newspaper anthology, is that it's a mix. It's not just the more well-known creators, either alternative or otherwise, but they're people who probably no one would know again. So someone of some reputable stature, their work is nestled right next to creators that this may be their first publication in this format. Exactly. And so I love that democratic aspect to this. And you do have a wide variety of comics. Now, the pieces in Resist are much more overtly political, and necessarily so, than what we saw in Love is Love. And in fact, I talked earlier in Love is Love about those pieces that are relatively few, but kind of draw a clear line that, we will not go any further than this or take any more shit than this. That's what the vast majority of the pieces in Resist are all about. I mean, that's the tone there.
Yeah, we definitely have more overtly political, some, very, very angry pieces. And I think a lot more that, skew towards straight political cartoons, like the kind of single panel newspaper tradition of political cartoons than, most of the stuff that is in Love is Love.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I want to apologize before we get too far into this is that you probably hear on the microphone me snapping the newspaper open or crinkling it as I'm turning pages, so I apologize if that noise comes through the microphone.
Yeah, it'll probably come through my mic as well. But again, to remind our readers, this is not a regular comic or trade or graphic novel that Andy and I are discussing right now. This is a newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so right there, hearing pages move from both me and Andy. Now this collection is divided into 3 sections. The vast majority, over half of this newspaper, is under the section Women's Voices. And so these are by comics created by female creators. And then there is, I think, a 2-page section or 2-page spread called Gender Isn't Binary. And the subject of those cartoons are, the issue of gender, and we get into LGBTQ matters briefly. And then the last, maybe 5th of the newspaper is called The Man Cave, and it is contributions from male creators.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, one of the things that struck me, since you mentioned that section last there, but one of the things I wanted to comment on, and in this sort of in relationship to what we talked about with Love is Love, is the creators who bring their own properties to this anthology. Mm-hmm. And in the Man Cave section, the very first thing we get is a really great Bill Griffith comic with Zippy the Pinhead. Mm-hmm. But probably one of the biggest landmarks in this is the return of Dykes to Watch Out For by Alison Bechdel.
Yeah. And I think that's important just because, as you put it, it's the return of Dykes to Watch Out For. And
after 10, sorry to interrupt, but after a 10-year absence, I think she stopped doing it in 2006, if I'm right.
Yeah, or was it 2006 or 2008? I know it was at the tail end of the George W. Bush reign. Oh, no, that would have been, 2008. Mm-hmm. So it's been a while since we've seen those comics. So, it makes sense that Bechdel contributes something based on Dykes to Watch Out for this particular newspaper. So there's that. But you're right, another property is the Zippy. And as important as the Bechdel contribution was, I have to say, hands down, my favorite in this entire collection, on just if I look at everything in general, just appreciation, joy, laughs, has to be the extended Zippy Pinhead contribution here. But then again, I am prone to Zippy and Bill Griffith, so I like almost anything he would do. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of biased there. But the thing that I found particularly fascinating about this Zippy, now, for those who may not know much about Zippy the Pinhead, Bill Griffith, under the name Griffey, he's a character in this comic as well. And many of the strips of Zippy Pinhead comics are Griffey and Zippy having a conversation about something, and it could be almost anything. And basically you have, or what could be argued, the 2 sides of Bill Griffith, right? Mm-hmm. The more reasonable side of him, and then the more ridiculous, absurdist, non sequitur side coming through, obviously, Zippy. Mm-hmm. You have that here with a vengeance, but here I think it serves a particular purpose because it's almost as if Bill Griffith wants to make fun of the fact that Trump is our president now. And when you think, and this is the way I feel, it is, I still to this day, I mean, as devastated as I was by November 9th, another 9/11, I still can't take it seriously. I laugh at this. I think that this is a joke, even though I know there's no real thing to joke about here. So I feel like I need to be serious about this. And so I felt that two-sidedness coming out in this strip, that throughout, Zippy is making comments that, of course, are typical Zippy comments. When Griffey says, on the one hand, he was trying to make sense of Trump. He was a New York liberal. So is his hard right persona just an act? Will it just come and go? And then there's Steve Bannon, to which Zippy replies, if I buy a Breitbart hoodie, will I be allowed to go up in the gold-plated elevator at Trump Tower? And he says these little things throughout. And again, it just tells me we can't really take this presidency seriously, but at the same time we must. And I think that dichotomy, that back and forth, comes out perfectly in this strip.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I really feel like that, that is in fact something I thought about a lot today, as I've been kind of glued to the news and to social media about the developments that are happening
as we talk right now.
Yeah, and in fact, my wife Jennifer said something to me the other day, like when I said something about press conferences or something like that, she said, he's only been in office a week. And I thought, wow, this has felt like, a very long time. This week is way longer than I thought it was. So, but in kind of thinking about things, there are these moments where I feel like I don't want to laugh about this. This isn't funny. And then there's things that I see, memes posted to social media, some of the stuff that the Nib does, or Alec Baldwin's Trump impersonation on Saturday Night Live, that are hilarious. And I realize those things are effective too. There's an important role that parody and satire will play. And I wish events had taken place differently. So I don't want to sound like I'm glad things are the way they are, but I think we're heading into a great period of satire, political comedy, and especially editorial cartooning, which seemed to have been a kind of fading art for a while, and now it seems like a lot of great cartoonists, and we see this in Resist especially, are invigorated by these events.
Yeah. I've said this on the podcast before. The one and only good thing to come out of the Donald Trump candidacy, and this was before November 9th, that I said this, was the fact that we got Burke Breathitt and Bloom County back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only reason why, from what he said, that he started Bloom County again. And so that was a great time to celebrate. And again, we have Trump to thank for that. But you're right in that it's sad that we're where we are politically. However, given that context, I'm sure we're in store for a lot of really good stuff, a revival of the kind of creative projects that we just haven't seen much of, especially over the past 8 years. I think maybe not this kind of generation of creativity of the kind that we're talking about since the early days of 9/11 and the Iraq War.
Yeah. I've seen people posting on social media stuff like, look at the great music we got during the Reagan administration. And I think, well,
some of it.
No, I mean, I agree completely. I agree completely. We got great music, and that music was a part of the resistance to the Republican administration at the time and what it was doing. But I don't necessarily wish for, I'd rather have a peaceful world and shitty music than have great protest music coming out because there needs to be protest.
In going through this collection, Resist, and we should say resist !
Yeah.
Because that's in the title. I can't help but appreciate the fact that a lot of these creators are people that we have had on the show, either for one-on-one full interviews or even relatively brief interviews at various cons. One that I really enjoy is from someone that we've talked with on the show a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3 times, and that is Miss Lasco Gross.
Yeah.
She's got one called Bubble. And, this is something that I can relate to because I felt rather complacent during the election in thinking there's no way that Trump could win. And looking at it now, yeah, I was kind of in a bubble in terms of the reality surrounding me. And that's what this is all about, where she is awakened from her slumber within the bubble, and she draws herself as sleeping inside of a bubble.
Right.
And also her interactions afterwards with a Republican friend of hers who wears a bag over his head. So I know on the one hand, she probably does that so she's not giving away his identity. On the other hand, if you're a even reluctant Trump supporter, then wouldn't you want to place a bag over your head?
Yeah, and it may also be symbolic of how she imagines this person sees the world. It's very
right.
With blinders on.
Right.
So, I'm glad you mentioned that one because I felt like Miss Lasco Gross's contribution here was one of the strongest in this collection.
And then another artist that we had on the Comics Alternative is Liana Fink, and she's got a full page cartoon that's made up of 3 individual strips. That's a take off of Little Nemo in Slumberland, and this is Little Nano and the American Dream. And in there are 3 strips, and in each of the strip, the Little Nemo character is a female Little Nano, and it is the protagonist who goes into this dream, I guess right-wing dream or Republican dream, whatever you want to call it, the Donald Trump dream. And at the end of at least the first 2 strips, she wakes up in bed as Nemo did and go, "Oh my God, it was just a nightmare. Okay, I'm glad that everything's okay." But the very last strip, the 3rd one, ends, interestingly enough, without her waking up.
Yeah, and with a call coming from off panel to wake up.
Yeah,
and not being able to. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that one, and I'm glad Liana Fink got such a significant contribution to the to this collection. And that just reminded me another guest that we had on the show fairly recently was Mary Naomi, and her short piece. In which she's walking through the city with this, the thought balloons overhead asking, how many of these people around here voted for Trump, and that's I think a feeling a lot of people had who were devastated by this election, and then it ends with her getting told on the subway, "Go back to your own country." Another experience that I know a lot of people had, and she yells back, "This is my country." And then right below that is one by Carol Leigh, which I really also appreciated quite a bit too, and that's one that kind of falls under the category of the personal reaction to the events.
Now, the playing off of the Mary Naomi strip where she is walking in the crowd and wondering, okay, which one of these guys actually voted for Trump? Whom am I among? That one got me to think about the more hard edge side of me when I look at all of these protests, and not just the literal protests and the gatherings that we've had for the past 2 weekends, but also these kind of publishing protests, as we're discussing this week, the Resist and the Love is Love. I mean, I was watching, especially last week, not so much this week, but last weekend watching all of the protest. And every time I turn on the TV, I mean, I'm fascinated by that, but I couldn't help but think, I wonder how many people who are marching right now didn't vote, period. I can't help but think that in many ways we as a country have no one but ourselves to blame if there weren't, especially for those who did not make the effort to go out and vote, whether it would be from apathy or complacency or what have you. I'm not trying to point fingers or lay blame, even though, you know, sometimes it feels good to try to do that. But there's a more pessimistic side of me that while I applaud all of this stuff, I don't know, I have my doubts that this will work. It seems to me that as much as I would love to protest and speak out and support and back causes, organizations, monetarily and otherwise, that it's the real politic. It's the people who actually have the power, you know, having gotten it through whatever means. That is what it's all going to come down to. And at the same time, I don't want to use that as an excuse not to do anything. But there's in reading all of this, both books for this week, I can't help but think, I hope it works. I don't know if it will. Is it a drop in the bucket? At least it's a drop. At least there's something going on there. I mean, do you struggle with this kind of protest? I mean, it's kind of like a few years ago when we had the Charlie Hebdo, where people marched in the street. I am Charlie Hebdo, and I got a little cynical and said, well, no, you're not, because you're doing something relatively safe right now compared to the people who actually put their pens and their necks on the line in doing what they did. I don't know. Sometimes I just get a little too cynical.
Well, I see what you're saying, and I think that there is, there is a tendency towards the kind of, slacktivism of, I retweeted this meme that's my contribution to the cause, or I wrote a scathing Facebook post. But if you're mainly in a bubble, that's only preaching to the converted. And sometimes I do wonder about how kind of deeply entrenched our partisan politics are, to the point of, are we going to really sway somebody else to change their mind about things, or are they it's just going to cause them to dig in deeper? What I hope for example, with my own contribution to the ACLU and joining that organization and so on, is that we saw last night a tangible, positive impact that organization can have, with something like Planned Parenthood, that if or NPR or PBS, if Congress decides to defund all those things, it's going to be up to us to support them if we want them to continue. So I do feel like that there are in those cases a very positive impact that we can have with our checkbooks. Now with Resist, I think first of all the power in it is to maybe galvanize people. Right. So take the person, and I feel like I've been in this boat for a lot of the things I've been seeing. Take somebody who has been satisfied with, their slacktivism, and take them to the next level. Okay, so get that person motivated to go out and do something. And I'm involved in local organizations now, and I'm hoping to see, doing things like, volunteering more. And stuff like that, and trying to make those positive impacts. But what I really hope overall is going to be an outcome of all this is that younger people, especially, and as a teacher, I see a lot of things in my students that make me hopeful for the future, is that they're going to grow up in a world in which that feeling that your vote doesn't count or doesn't matter, or that both sides are equivalent, is not gonna happen, or they're not gonna feel that way. I mean, I remember back in the what was it, the 2000 election, where Ralph Nader would say, I give both parties a D plus. That basically, the feeling was Democrats and Republicans are both in the pockets of lobbyists, and they're not doing anything to make things better, and so they're pretty much the same. And I think that impacted a lot of young people to think that voting doesn't matter. It's 6 of one and half dozen of another. Now it's absolutely not that. Now there's such a very clear division, and that so that in kind of getting back to what you said, if there are people out there that are marching who didn't vote, and I really don't know how much of a phenomenon that could actually be, but if there are, and now they're motivated, that's good. I mean, I wish they'd been motivated before, but that's a positive impact. And so if these if this activism that's going on now does more to kind of resist the normalization of some of the behavior we're seeing, marginalize the hate, and show that there are more people that disagree with the policies and opinions of the Trump administration than agree with them, then that can only have, I think, a positive effect on the future. So there's times I feel completely disheartened by what I'm seeing, but then I think, well, I'm seeing hints and signs that there are more good people in the world than there aren't.
Right. Now, what you're saying here, and especially what I had just said previously, my cynical comments, I want to go back to what I said when we were first discussing Love is Love, and my dividedness about the reading experience. That on the one hand, I feel that it's too much to take in emotionally in one sitting. On the other hand, I think, well, maybe that's the way you do take it in, and you should take it in. By contrast, I think that the power of resist is something where you must take it in all at once, in one sitting. And for this reason, because what it does to you. I mean, this is a galvanizing collection of comics that throughout, from beginning to end, I felt agitated. I felt that I had to do something. I felt that I wanted to do something. In other words, I felt a sense of purpose and even mission. I don't want to sound too romantic about this in reading this. And so I think that's where something like this does come into play, as along with all of these other protests that are going to erupt or planned in the months to come. That, by themselves, they may not do much of anything. But I think, as you said, there's a cumulative effect here. And to me, it all comes down to agitation. It's similar to that, the squeaky wheel always gets the oil philosophy. You got to complain. You got to kvetch. You got to hawk. You got to tell people this is not right. You got to complain. And if we do this over and over and over again, this has got to have some kind of effect. And so I think of the strips in Resist are this kind of agitation, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing that I couldn't help but think of. I had Woody Guthrie songs going through my head as I was reading this, because I mean, this is the kind of thing that he would pick up and I think absolutely love. I mean, this is the comics equivalent to what, the Woody Guthrie catalog.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's placing too much on Resist.
No,
But,
I mean, I think it's it's an important work. I wonder if it will continue. I hope it does.
I hope it does as well. I want to bring up one or two of the strips that we haven't really discussed yet. In one, I had, and then I just closed my paper, and I'm sure our listeners can hear me turning. And this is by a creator. Oh, here it is. Emile Ferris. Now, she has a book coming out soon from Fantagraphics called My Favorite Thing is Monsters.
Yeah.
And I think that was supposed to be released at some point last year, but then it was postponed. I'm looking forward to this. I did pre-order this, but now I'm really looking forward to it. I don't think I've seen any of Ferris's work before Resist. But here we have a one-pager that is a little surreal in some ways, but it tells this personal story about how she worked in one of these Renaissance dinner establishments as a witch, and she noticed that outside taking a cigarette break, one of her colleagues had apparently been killed by these, white supremacist Nazi guys, and they take her away to their secret hideaway, and it's about her experiences there, where she becomes a Scheherazade. Is where this ends up, and I think that's a great brief story. But I love the art. I love where she's going in this story. And again, I called it surreal because there's something about it to it that just doesn't seem like it could make sense or it could be real. But I like it, and so now this has my appetite whetted for My Favorite Thing is Monsters.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering about that one. I'd be curious to know if that is an autobiographical story or if it is, just a first-person narrative, because it's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful either way, but it's completely shocking if it's autobiographical.
And then another one that I really enjoy is C.C. Bell's strip Voice. And we talked about her just recently in our Best American Comics 2016 episode. She had a piece from El Defo in there, and this is one. And one of the things I liked about this is not only the Bell's style, which I appreciate, but also it reminded me of the fact that I'd almost forgotten that Donald Trump had called Marley Martin retarded. Again, he says so much stupid shit that you kind of forget some of the ones that don't get as much press. Yeah,
it's surprising that one hasn't been more entrenched than as the the one where he made fun of the handicapped New York Times reporter.
Well, that was more visual.
Yeah, that's true,
and that's one of the reasons why that got a lot of airtime. Now we have mentioned that there are creators in this newspaper from all around the world. So it's not just an American phenomenon, just like the marches themselves. This is made up of contributors from all over the place.
Yeah.
And some of these are just, one panel, almost like editorial cartoons. Some are more narrative-based. Some are more illustration. There's one here I just opened to an image of Sienna Valenzuela Peterson, who is a Mexican-American artist. And basically it is of a woman. You assume that she's Mexican because of her hairstyle, but also she's crying as she's looking up, and the tears under one eye is almost like a bleeding United States, and the tears under the other eye is a bleeding Mexican flag.
Yeah.
So you get things like that throughout. I really like this. This has to be one of the highlights of the year so far for me. Resist.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I first heard about it, I guess it was funded through Kickstarter initially. Is that right? If I remember right. And and the call went out for contributors. I was really excited to see what could be coming out. I was hoping I would be able to get a copy. knowing that I wasn't going to be able to make it to Washington, D.C. had me worried, but I'm glad we were able to get copies.
Yeah. And again, we do want to thank the great folks at More Fun Comics and Games in Denton, Texas, as well as Jared at Big Planet, who has several shops in the D.C. area.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared.
So this was a political show of ours. We started off with the new collection from IDW, Love is Love, and this is an anthology that benefits the families and survivors of the June 2016 murders at the Pulse Nightclub in Orlando, Florida. And then after that, we looked at a newspaper freebie that came out last weekend, Resist. Mm-hmm. And this started off as an idea by Gabe Fowler with Smoke Signal and Desert Island Comics, and Francois Mouly and her daughter Nadja Spiegelman pulled everything together. Great collections.
Yep.
And if you want to look at great comics like this, maybe with less of a political edge, then you would do well to check with our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com. They'll have a ton of discounts for the month of February, guaranteed. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about this, our very political episode of the Comics Alternative. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe, or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right, or you can get a hold of us by email. We are two guys at comicsalternative.com, and you can also contact us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed, which you can check out at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right, but you can also find us elsewhere in the social media world, such as on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is, again, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and find out what we're doing and let us know how we're doing.
Yes, we would very much like to hear from you. And, you know, if you did go out to any of the protests last weekend or even this weekend, we'd like to hear from you to see what your experiences were and maybe if you were able to pick up your copy of Resist.
Yeah, get back to us on that.
Yep, and we'll share it with the rest of our listeners. We'll be back next week with our February preview show. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.